Before we start this video, the manga might contain so please be aware. Kosuke struggled helplessly against the iron grip that pinned him. A choke sound escaped his throat, followed by a painful grunt as his captor's strength forced him down. He hit the ground hard, the air knocked from his lungs, only for a blade to pin his hand to the dirt, sharp agony radiating through his arm. Above him, a voice as cold as steel demanded to know what humans were doing there. She warned him that defiance would mean death, her tone leaving no room for doubt, before snapping at him again for his silence. Desperate, Kosuke blurted out everything. He introduced himself with full formality, rambling about his name, age, occupation, and even the embarrassing fact that he was single. He elaborated, explaining his hobbies, survival PC games, nightly runs around the neighborhood, as though this mundane information might somehow save his life. Then, voice trembling, he tried to justify his bizarre situation, how he had awoken on the edge of a cliff with no idea where or when he was, wandering through a forest in search of food and water. In his own frantic words, he was simply a man in distress trying not to die. His captor looked down at him skeptically, asking if he truly expected her to believe such absurdity. Kosuke, struggling to sit up, insisted that it was true, whether she believed him or not, but his train of thought stopped cold as he finally took in her appearance. A stunning woman with dark skin, long ears, and piercing eyes. His mind went blank for a second. A dark elf, he thought in stunned admiration, just before blurting out something stupid. His awe quickly turned into pain when her boot connected sharply with his face, sending him sprawling again. He sat up, clutching his cheek, an angry red handprint blooming across it. He demanded to know why she'd hit him. She answered coolly that it was for calling her by the wrong term. Dark Elf said with an insensitive tone that offended her kind. Her aura flared, a mix of pride and menace, as she warned him to remember it. Kosuke glared up at her, shouting back that she could have just explained that instead of kicking him like a savage. Her gaze sharpened dangerously. A human calling her a savage, was it? She mused, leaning close enough for him to notice the movement of her chest. When she caught him staring, her voice turned dangerously sweet as she asked, "What exactly were you looking at?" Kosuke, either too honest or too foolish, muttered that it was her chest. Amused, she chuckled softly, calling him an honest man and saying that she liked that. Then, in the same calm tone, she removed her sword from his hand and asked, "What exactly were you doing there?" Still dazed, Kosuke admitted that he had no idea. He replayed the events in his head, trying to make sense of it all. One moment he was on Earth, the next he was standing in the wilderness under alien skies. He told her about the planets overhead, one enormous and visible in the daytime, another small and moon-like. Sylphie, as she later introduced herself, explained that what he had seen were Rancor and Orcus. They were in a place called Risu, part of the Pensu continent, at the edge of the Omit wilderness bordering the Black Forest. The explanation triggered a vivid flashback, his first day of survival. He had awoken alone in an unfamiliar world, surrounded by nothing but wind and endless landscape. He checked his pockets in disbelief, a wallet with 2 bills and a ticket, his phone, and his house key. Clinging to the hope that civilization might exist somewhere, he had thought maybe he could find a town and take a taxi. But reality crushed him quickly. There were no roads, no people, only silence and the crushing realization that this wasn't Earth. He had tried to stay rational, telling himself it could have been worse, at least no monsters yet, but fear not at him. He needed shelter, food, and water. His instincts, sharpened by countless hours of survival games, whispered that shelter should come first. Determined, he ventured into the forest. He scavenged stones and wood, crudely fashioning a stone knife. With a triumphant grin, he announced his first success. The small victory lifted his spirits. He explored cautiously, finding a clearing with a massive tree that seemed safe enough to use as a temporary base. There, he began crafting with whatever materials he could find, branches, leaves, and bark. He used his makeshift knife to create a bow drill, muttering to himself about friction fires and hoping his gaming knowledge wouldn't fail him. It did, several times. Smoke teased him, only to vanish. The boat broke, his patience wore thin, but finally, a spark caught. Fire bloomed. Kosuke stared at it with reverent awe, warmth spreading through his fingers and chest alike. Night fell. Hunger soon followed. He sat beside the fire, its light flickering across his tired face. Loneliness gnawed deeper than hunger. He grumbled bitterly about how he hadn't been given any of the cheat abilities that every other person summoned to another world seemed to get. Hours passed. Still nothing. Exhausted, he hugged his knees and decided to rest, planning to search for food and water at dawn. That was when it happened. A faint blue glow shimmered from the bonfire, and his half-dreaming eyes widened as a translucent menu appeared in the air before him, just like in a game, a crafting menu. Stunned, he experimented, thinking of pressing keys in his mind. The interface responded. Options appeared and vanished at his will. His disbelief melted into wild excitement. He found an inventory screen, a status page, and even crafting recipes. The next hours were a frenzy of discovery. He crafted stone tools, a knife, axe, spear, bow, arrows, and even a canteen, each appearing with a satisfying shimmer. His first attempts at throwing and shooting went horribly wrong, but it didn't matter. The thrill of progress filled him with newfound hope. When night came again, he organized his inventory, placing each tool neatly into its invisible storage. With a proud sigh, he leaned back by the dying fire, declaring it time to sleep. Going out at night, he reasoned, was basically suicide. Morning came, and with it, a surge of humor and self-awareness. Stretching, he muttered a sarcastic commentary about day 2 of survival in another world. He might have been losing his mind, but humor helped him stay sane. His thirst soon reminded him of reality, and he set out to find water. Something strange happened. His body felt light, responsive. Thinking about movement like in a game, he realized he could run faster, jump higher, and even perform a double jump by mentally hitting the space key. Laughing like a maniac, he bounded through the forest until he spotted a shimmering river. That laughter died the moment he saw the beast. It was massive, crossed with some reptilian horror, fangs bared and tail whipping. Fear froze him for a heartbeat before his instincts screamed to move. He sprinted, activating whatever strange shift power his mind conjured, but the creature was fast too. Desperation gave him courage. He turned with his spear and lunged. He missed. The creature pounced, roaring in his face. Kosuke yanked another spear from his inventory mid-panic and struck again. The weapon shattered, but miraculously lodged in the beast's throat. Blood sprayed. The monster writhed in agony, howling as Kosuke scrambled to his feet. Gripping a stone axe, he struck again and again until the creature finally collapsed. He stood over it, chest heaving, unable to tell if the trembling in his hands was fear or exhilaration. A game-like window appeared. Loot, raw meat, leather, bones, tendons. The corpse vanished in a shimmer of particles, leaving only a bloodstain. Kosuke stared, half in awe, half in disbelief, then quickly stored everything in his inventory before anything else found him. He collected water, crafted a canteen, and began boiling it at his campfire. The strange mechanics of the world multiplied his water somehow, but he decided not to question it. Drinking deeply, he sighed in bliss. The roasted meat, too, tasted surprisingly like chicken, his first real meal in this strange new world. As his energy returned, he began improving his base. A shovel helped him dig a circular foundation, the soil vanishing neatly into his inventory. He discovered new crafting recipes, bricks, farmland, and even a furnace, and marveled at how quickly things were coming together. He fashioned a hammock and strung it between 2 trees, deciding that the next day he would search for metal, salt, and perhaps new crafting materials. He drifted into sleep, unaware of the figure watching over him. A woman stood in the moonlight, her silver hair gleaming, armor glinting faintly through the trees. Sylphie, the elf who had once pinned him to the ground, regarded him quietly. She listened to his entire explanation with a measured expression. Eventually she nodded, admitting she believed him, an extraordinary concession for one of her kind. When a soft green light appeared, hovering near them, Kosuke tensed. Sylphie extended her hand, explaining it was the spirit of life. The orb touched his hand, filling him with warmth. The wound on his palm vanished instantly. Kosuke gasped, marveling at the healing sensation, and Sylphie observed that the spirit seemed to like him. That realization sent his imagination soaring. If the spirit liked him, maybe he could use magic. Sylphie immediately shattered that hope with calm precision, telling him he possessed no magical aptitude whatsoever. His shoulders slumped dramatically, crushed by her blunt assessment. When she turned to leave, he scrambled up, insisting he'd accompany her. She gave him a pointed look, warning that staying alone meant either meeting another monster or being executed by elves. He quickly agreed to follow. Before they set off, he realized he didn't even know her name. Sylphie blinked, momentarily flustered, then introduced herself with pride. She was one of the guardians of the Black Forest, known among humans as the Witch of the Dark Forest. Her expression softened slightly, though the sword on her back and the glint in her eyes reminded him that she was still far more dangerous than she looked. And so, Kosuke's absurd, survival game-like journey in another world truly began, guided, reluctantly, by a fierce and beautiful elf who might one day save him or kill him himself. Well,
I don't know. You tell me.
As dawn broke over the forest, the air was cool and thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. Kosuke ran through the undergrowth, panting heavily, his voice cracking as he called out for Sylphie to wait. The fourth day of their ordeal had begun, and fatigue pressed against his body like lead. Beside him, Sylphie strode forward with unshakable resolve, her pace never faltering. When Kosuke finally caught up, he groaned, shoulders slumping. They had been walking without rest since morning, and his legs screamed in protest. Sylphie's expression remained firm as she cast him a sidelong glance. There was a trace of mockery in her eyes, a teasing jab about how easily he lost composure and acting unmanly. Without slowing, she gestured ahead, telling him to look. When he followed her gaze, the sight stole his breath. Beyond the trees, where the forest opened into a sea of rolling hills, a village sprawled in the distance, alive with movement and light. Sylphie announced with a hint of pride that this was her home. Kosuke's jaw dropped. The settlement was far larger than he'd imagined. In his mind, an absurd fantasy began to play out. He pictured himself stepping into the village square, greeted with warmth and applause. A cheerful voice in his imagination proclaimed that the people would welcome a traveler from another world with open arms. Smiling at the thought, he murmured that perhaps they would treat him as an honored guest. But his daydream shattered when Sylphie abruptly stopped and handed him a faintly glowing collar. Her tone left no room for argument as she told him to put it on before entering. He blinked at it in confusion. Was it some sort of ornament? Sylphie snapped at him to hurry, explaining curtly that it was a charm meant to keep him alive. Grateful or not, she warned, he would need it. The moment they stepped through the village gates, the air turned hostile. Instead of the warm welcome he'd imagined, a chorus of hatred erupted. Faces twisted with fury, villagers surged toward them, brandishing weapons and shouting for blood. Sylphie moved instinctively to block them, her voice sharp as she ordered the mob to stand down. Kosuke, heart pounding, could barely process what was happening. The crowd's chants grew uglier, demands for him to burn, to die. Sylphie told him to wait while she went to speak with the guards. Kosuke gawked at her, incredulous. Wait here? In the middle of a mob bent on killing him? But before he could follow, several guards appeared, one of them, a male warrior, fixing him with an unreadable stare. He muttered that it was too crowded and ordered him to come with him, leading him into a narrow alleyway. For a moment, he thought he might be helping him escape. He barely had time to wonder before he shoved him into an alleyway. "This place will do," he said coldly, standing over him. He tried to protest, but her disdainful mutter about humans silenced him. Then from the shadows, hulking shapes emerged, two horned beasts, their monstrous frames blocking the exits. Kosuke's breath caught. The alley was crawling with figures, every eye burning with murderous intent. Panic clawed up his chest as he realized he was surrounded. The weight of that silent bloodlust was suffocating. Then a voice tore through the tension, Sylphie's, sharp and furious. Before anyone could react, the ground exploded. A blast of force and smoke sent attackers sprawling. Kosuke gasped, shielding his face from the flying debris. When the dust cleared, Sylphie stood before him, chain in hand, her aura radiating fury. She declared that no one had the right to harm what belonged to her. Kosuke winced as the chain tightened painfully around him, yelping for her to stop. She pressed a heel against his back, her tone dripping with arrogance as she taunted the stunned onlookers that if anyone was to torment him, it would be her alone. The crowd scattered, murmuring in fear. When the noise faded, Sylphie yanked the chain, dragging Kosuke out to the outer village. Once they were far enough away from prying eyes, Kosuke grumbled that her performance had been too convincing. Sylphie brushed off his complaint with a smirk, saying deception only worked when it looked real. He muttered that he'd remembered this humiliation. Her response was a lecture on control. When walking a dog, the master must hold the leash. He asked how long she'd been planning this act, but she ignored the question, her attention shifting back to the path. As the forest gave way to open plains, she explained that the outskirts housed refugees, victims of the Holy Kingdom's tyranny. Subhumans, she said, were oppressed mercilessly in the wilderness of Omet. Across the continent of Penso, humans and the races they once subjugated were locked in endless conflict. The refugees here had fled from
Vebanad, a kingdom driven to ruin by persecution. Kosuke listened quietly, murmuring his understanding, until something glimmered in the distance. Curious, he asked about the vast floating fields shimmering under the sunlight. Sylphie replied that they were magical farmlands sustained by enchantments. He couldn't help but admire them, noting that this world's technology outshone even Japan's agriculture in its own way. They passed through the lively outskirts where elves, beast folk, and other races went about their work. Kosuke observed how the village was arranged, elves at the center, craftspeople surrounding them, and the farmlands encircling everything else. He pointed towards a cluster of homes deeper inside. Sylphie told him to follow her. Their destination lay ahead. At last she stopped before a modest, elegant house nestled among the trees. She announced that this was her home. Kosuke stared in surprise, murmuring his approval. Once inside, he instinctively sniffed the air, only to earn a sharp glare. Sylphie accused him of improper behavior, though he swore he had only caught a pleasant scent. Maybe incense? She rolled her eyes, saying there was no such thing. Settling down, he finally asked why she had rescued him in the first place. She reclined lazily in her chair, saying there was no particular reason. Maybe she simply found him interesting. He doubted that, prompting her to elaborate. His existence intrigued her, his background, his powers, even the mystery of his arrival. She spoke of an old legend from the Holy Kingdom of saviors from another world who descended with divine purpose, sometimes even becoming the ancestors of elves themselves. Perhaps she mused he too carried a gift meant to change the world. Kosuke scratched his neck, uneasy under her expectant gaze. He admitted he might disappoint her. Still, she leaned closer, curiosity gleaming in her eyes, asking what sort of secret ability he possessed. He thought to himself, this felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. Would she lose interest if he told her nothing? Finally, he confessed cautiously. His ability was his lifeline, and while he was grateful she had saved him, its misuse could be dangerous. He wasn't even certain of its limits in this world. Sylphie smiled faintly, promising to keep his secret if that was his wish. Her voice dropped to a whisper that felt more like a challenge than comfort. When he mumbled that he might shut her lips himself, she chuckled, suggesting they test that idea later. His heart nearly leapt from his chest at the teasing remark. Trying to regain composure, he offered to show her his ability instead. She fetched a plate, curious, and watched as he summoned items from thin air. He explained that his power allowed him to store objects in a space resembling a boundless warehouse. Sylphie acknowledged how convenient it was, though he admitted he didn't know yet its full range. Producing a crude spear and axe, he said he'd crafted them himself. Her eyes widened with surprise, remarking that such skill was impressive for a novice. Internally, Kosuke scolded himself. He should have demonstrated something simpler first. Sylphie's smirk told him she had noticed his slip. She teasingly observed that he must have the power to create things easily, calling him careless for revealing so much. Then he pulled out a chunk of lizard meat, saying it was from his earlier hunt, along with every grim leftover from the scene. Sylphie raised her eyebrow at his mention of blood and carcasses. Before the topic grew too grim, he clutched his stomach, declaring he was starving. Sylphie nodded, saying she was about to bring that up anyway. When he asked what she meant, she reminded him, wasn't it natural for a slave to cook for his master? Kosuke sighed in defeat, bowing exaggeratedly and addressing her as master, asking for lessons in the art of cooking. Amused, Sylphie agreed to teach him, warning that she would only explain once. He'd better remember every word. That evening, the faint glow of lantern light filled Sylphie's wooden home. The smell of grilled meat and herbs still lingered in the air, a reminder of the meal they had shared. Kosuke hadn't expected his first attempt at cooking in another world to go so smoothly, but Sylphie seemed genuinely pleased. With a small, satisfied smile, she remarked that it had turned out far better than she expected, especially for his first time handling her kitchen. Grinning in relief, Kosuke thanked her, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. After a brief silence, he glanced around the cozy room and asked where he should sleep. He pointed toward a bare corner, suggesting he could hang a hammock there if she didn't mind. Sylphie tilted her head, considering his earnestness. Then, without hesitation, she replied that she didn't particularly mind, before adding, almost casually, that he could always share her bed instead. The tone of her voice made the offer sound half like a tease, half like an invitation. Kosuke froze, blinking, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. He turned toward her, slowly, eyes wide. Together? he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. When her calm gaze didn't waver, he repeated the word in disbelief, as though trying to confirm it wasn't some elaborate joke. Her eyes held his with quiet amusement, their golden hue shimmering in the lamplight. He felt his heartbeat quicken under that look. Trying to think of anything else to say, he muttered that he wasn't familiar with the ideas of love and chastity in this world. Sylphie arched an eyebrow, repeating his words with mild curiosity. Then, lips curving into a teasing smile, she asked whether such questions really needed to be asked by a man. Flustered, Kosuke stammered that he wasn't some kind of beast driven by impulse. Her laughter was soft, but her response cut through the air like silk. Humans and animals, she said, weren't all that different when it came to that sort of thing. Then, leaning slightly closer, she raised her hand to her chest in a deliberate gesture, her tone playful yet suggestive. All it really took was a spark of curiosity. Kosuke's thoughts spiraled in a flurry. Was she serious? Was this another of her tests? His pulse pounded as his eyes darted between her calm expression and the space between them that suddenly felt far too small. His mind screamed conflicting thoughts. I can do this, right? Is this allowed? Can I follow my instincts? Each one louder than the last, tangled somewhere between hesitation and desire. Then, with a sultry smile, she asked in a voice that dripped with challenge whether he wouldn't crave the woman he desired. Her words struck something deep within him. His restraint vanished, and determination filled its place. He rose to his feet, thinking he no longer needed any reason to hold back. With a surge of resolve, he swept her into his arms, and let's just say he didn't miss his chance to make his move.